Hey yo everybody, welcome back to Tavian's World of Reptiles. I hope you all are doing well and taking care of yourselves. Today we are joined by Iro, my spider ball python. He is looking beautiful. So today we're going to shift gears a little bit and we're going to talk about what happens with those snakes when they're finally out of those breeder tubs and go off to private keepers like myself, and what expectations should be had for private keepers like myself when it comes to keeping their snakes in tubs. Now there are a lot of people who may understand why breeders keep their snakes in tubs and racks, but do not understand why private keepers like myself would decide and choose to keep their snakes in racks and tubs. So we're going to talk about some of the various reasons why private keepers like myself might actually keep their snakes in racks and tubs even after they have left the breeders. The first reasons people keep their snakes in racks is because the snakes are still babies and a lot of space can actually overwhelm and stress them. Now yes, there are people who believe that if you really decorate an enclosure and put enough hides and really put enough shrubbery and everything else inside the enclosure, that a baby snake can actually thrive in a larger enclosure if it is done right. But most people prefer to not take those measures and just keep their snakes in smaller tubs until they get some size to them and actually wouldn't stress under having a larger enclosure. Another reason why people choose to keep their snakes in tubs even after getting them from the breeder is because it is easier for them to keep the humidity levels and temps where they need to be for the snake. When they go into larger enclosures, it becomes a little bit harder to keep temps and humidity levels where they need to be. So this might be an easier route for somebody who is newer to keeping snakes and hasn't quite mastered what it is, what all goes into keeping their snakes in the larger enclosure. People who aren't beginners and they choose to do this, they do this because it is just easier for them to know that their snake's humidity levels are being kept where they need to be, and that the snake has their heat exactly where it needs to be without the stress of worrying about a larger space and making sure that the heat is where it needs to be throughout the entire space. And then of course there's just the matter of being able to save space, because tubs and racks do save space as opposed to larger enclosures. Now, this doesn't mean that those people don't love their snakes. They do have love for their snakes. There are various reasons why people who are private keepers choose to keep their snakes in tubs. There's also the argument that even if you do choose to keep your snakes in tubs, you can do a lot more than just leaving a water bottle and some paper. And I think that's a super important thing to focus on, because I used to be one of those people that really cringed when I saw a lot of the tubs that private keepers would keep their snakes in, because it's very much so just like the breeders. It's just a water bowl and a hide maybe, and then some paper laid down. There's not much enrichment for the snake, and I used to really cringe at that. And it made me really wonder if there was a better way of keeping snakes in tubs. And then I met a really wonderful person on Facebook, and she was actually sharing a lot of her tubs, and I was really blown away because I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. Her name is Andrea Boa, and you can find her on Facebook. She would share photos of her snake tubs, and let me tell you, they were the most amazing things I have ever seen. Check these out. So one of the first pictures she sent me was this one, and it's a clear shot of the racks that she uses, which are from Animal Plastics. I really like how deep these drawers are, because it looks like it allows you to have space to really add enrichment in there for your snakes that some of the breeder racks just don't allow. So let's go ahead and take a moment to see what she's got going on inside for her boas. This is probably the best representation of keeping snakes in tubs that I have ever seen. So if you are thinking about keeping your snakes in tubs, I believe that you should go above and beyond, especially if you are a private keeper, because you're not breeding and they can have a little bit more than just paper in a bowl. Now, this is not ragging on those who choose to still keep just paper in a water bowl. You have your reasons for that, and I don't know what they are, so it's not my place to judge you on that. But man, if you are like, how can I do this tub business and do it right? This is a primo examples of what I'm talking about, because that is just good stuff right there. There are so many reasons why people choose to keep their snakes in tubs, and there are so many different ways that people choose to keep their snakes in tubs, even as private keepers like myself. Now, I personally have a lot of my snakes are still in tubs, and that is because they are babies. But I do plan to get those who are young into larger enclosures. Now, not all of them are in tubs because they are babies. There are some, like my sunbeam snake, who does not ever surface. She is literally in the dirt 99.9% of the time. So I never see her. I'm not going to get a large and elaborate enclosure for a snake that I am never going to see. So she will stay in a tub for the rest of her life. Of course, her tub will get bigger as she gets bigger, but she is not going to get a very elaborate tub. Right now, I have my ball python Zeus back in a tub. He is an adult. I did have him in a larger enclosure, but it was not an enclosure that worked well for him. It really stressed him out. He actually went off eating. Even if it was fully decorated, he just didn't do well with having as much height. So I put him back in a tub, and he seems to be doing a lot better. I would like to try and see if maybe I can get him back into a enclosure again, but I'm not going to push it, because if he just doesn't want it, he just doesn't want it. Now, I don't know. It seems like this little guy might be somebody who would appreciate an enclosure that has some height to it as he gets bigger, because he does move around a lot. He climbs around a lot, but babies do tend to be a bit more active than adults. So, and then there's my blood python. He is in a tub at this time. I have tried him in a larger enclosure at one time, but I also didn't have it very well decorated, and so it was kind of just a big open space, and I'm sure that just stressed him out. So I put him back in the tub. So eventually in my future, I would like to try him back into a, not very high, maybe like an 18-inch high enclosure, but something with more space than a tub provides, and see how he does if I really decorate it and put a lot of, greenery and shrubbery and all the other stuff in it to just make it feel more full and less open. And I think maybe he would do better. But for right now, because he is still young, he is in a tub. And then, of course, I have my Brazilian rainbow boa and my Amazon tree boa, who are both very tiny still, and they are in tubs because they are still very small. Now, they will, of course, get larger enclosures as they get larger, and they will not stay in tubs. So I have my various reasons for why I personally keep my snakes in tubs. And so when you see people who have their snakes in tubs and they're not breeders, I suggest you take a moment to think twice before you make judgments on it. You don't know why they're doing that. You don't know what the circumstances is. And sometimes you might be seeing these things, and those are snakes that are still in quarantine. Snakes that are quarantined tend to be in a minimalistic keeping, like just literally a water bowl and some paper towels so that they can be properly monitored. So don't be so quick to pass judgments when you see people who are private keepers and their snakes are in tubs and they're taking pictures or whatever. You don't know the situation. You don't know the different reasons for why people are doing that, but there are various reasons for why private keepers like myself keep their snakes in tubs. And there are some amazing ways that this can be done, that you can keep your snakes in tubs and have them have all the enrichment that they need, as I showed you earlier with Andrea Boa's pictures. There's one more thing I definitely want to address, especially for these new snake keepers out there, or anybody who's thinking about getting into snakes. I don't want you to take this video as a reason to say that you can just go get a bunch of snakes and then put them in racks and just be okay, because that saves space and you will be doing everything right, because not all species belong in rack systems. So for instance, we want to think about things like arboreal species. They don't do well in rack systems because they do need to have space to climb. And yeah, you're going to see some videos of breeders who have their snakes who are arboreal in rack systems, and And you know, there are reasons for that. Obviously, they are breeders, and you have to be a little bit more selective when it comes to what you keep your snakes in as breeders. But then, of course, you will see people who are not breeders keeping their snakes who are arboreal in rack systems, and this is, I think, is not okay. I think if you have an arboreal snake, you need to provide the space for that snake to be arboreal. If you're gonna get some snakes and you're thinking about getting some, please, please, please do your research on which snakes would be okay to keep in tubs, especially long term. Like if you got something like a boa, I wouldn't suggest thinking that you could keep a boa in a rack system for long term. It's not healthy, and yes, there are breeding snakes who stay in boas, who stay in rack systems their whole life, but I think if you get a boa as a private keeper, you should know that your 8 to 9 foot snake deserves a much larger enclosure as it gets bigger. Reticulated pythons also are not snakes that I think should be kept in rack systems for the duration of their life. They are large snakes. They do deserve a lot more space to move around than what I think racks can actually provide them. But that's my personal opinion. There are also a lot of people out there who keep reticulated pythons that are not breeders in very large racks, but just also still not large enough for me to be like, oh, I'm happy about that. But again, my own personal opinion. Everybody's allowed their own personal opinions. You're allowed to differ from my opinion, and that's fine. But yes, just if you are a new to this hobby, please don't think that because there are various understandable reasons for keeping snakes in racks that you should just go off and get a bunch of snakes because you can keep them in racks. Like, I really think you should just make sure you do your research before you just go get a bunch of snakes to begin with. Start slow, and don't overdo things just because rack systems are an option. So yes, I hope this video has been helpful to somebody. You guys take care, love yourselves, love your loved ones, and you guys keep spreading those herbs.